When you speak of Africa's fight for freedom, one name echoes louder than most: Patrice Lumumba. To many, he was a hero. To others, a dangerous dreamer. But to the Congolese people, he was the voice they had waited for, a voice that demanded that Africa rule itself. Lumumba was born in 1925 in Onalua, in what was then the Belgian Congo, a vast Central African land rich in minerals but soaked in colonial exploitation. For decades, Belgium had ruled the Congo like a private plantation. Rubber, ivory, copper, all ripped from the earth, while Congolese families were forced to work under brutal conditions. Whips, amputations, killings. The Congo Free State was one of the darkest chapters in European colonial history. Patrice Lumumba grew up seeing this cruelty, but he was not a man who would bow his head forever. He was intelligent, charismatic, and above all, he could speak, really speak. He learned French, worked as a postal clerk, then as a beer salesman, but what mattered was what he said when he stood before crowds in village squares and town halls. He told people, "We are not children. We do not need masters. We need freedom now." His words traveled fast. In the late 1950s, as winds of independence swept across Africa, Ghana under Kwame Nkrumah, Guinea under Sékou Touré, the Congo too began to stir. Strikes, protests, whispers in the bars, songs in the street. And in the center of this rising wave stood Lumumba. In 1958, he founded the movement National Congolese, MNC, the National Congolese Movement. His vision was simple but radical: a united Congo, free of Belgian rule, free of tribal divides, strong enough to stand tall in the world. But this dream was dangerous, not just for the Belgians, but for other Congolese politicians who saw power slipping from their hands. In 1959, tensions exploded. Riots in Leopoldville, today's Kinshasa. The Belgian authorities cracked down hard. Hundreds killed, thousands arrested. Lumumba was jailed too, but that only made him more famous. When he walked out of prison, the people saw a leader willing to suffer for freedom. Finally, Belgium realized it could no longer hold the Congo by force. In 1960, the Belgians rushed to grant independence, but they wanted it on their terms. They wanted to keep the wealth flowing. Copper from Katanga, diamonds from Kasai. So they supported rival leaders, whispered in ears, drew up quick deals in European hotels. Anything to weaken Lumumba's hand. But the people had chosen. In the first free elections, the MNC won big. On June 30, 1960, Patrice Lumumba stood before the new Congolese parliament and before the King of Belgium and gave a speech that still burns in Africa's memory. He did not thank the Belgians politely, as they expected. He spoke of the whip, the forced labor, the broken families, and of a new dawn where the Congolese would walk free, heads held high. His speech sent chills through Europe's halls of power. Here was a black African leader, young, proud, and not afraid to speak truth to the empire. To some, he was an inspiration. To others, a threat. But Lumumba's problems were only just beginning. Behind the Independence Day celebrations lurked old enemies and new conspiracies. Tribal rivalries, Belgian mining interests, Cold War chess games between the US and the Soviet Union. Lumumba was surrounded by enemies within and vultures abroad. Still, in those first days of freedom, he dreamed big. He called for a united army, nationalized resources, and refused to bow to foreign demands. But powerful men in dark suits, in Brussels, London, Washington, were already deciding that Patrice Lumumba was too dangerous to live. This is how a young postal clerk became Africa's firebrand, and how, in the months that followed, the hope of millions would hang on a single man's survival. The ink on Congo's independence papers had barely dried when the new nation began to tear at the seams. The Belgian army, still loyal to its white officers, mutinied when black soldiers demanded equal ranks and pay. The mining province of Katanga, rich with copper and uranium, declared secession under Moise Tshombe, backed quietly by Belgian companies desperate to keep their profits safe. Patrice Lumumba found himself surrounded by crisis. He was now prime minister, but his power was fragile, his army in chaos, his parliament divided, foreign advisors whispering poison in every corner. Western powers, terrified that Lumumba might lean toward the Soviet Union for help, decided he was a threat to be neutralized. Desperate to hold the country together, Lumumba asked the United Nations to send peacekeepers. They came, but refused to help him crush Katanga's secession. Betrayed, he turned to the Soviets for aid, a move that sealed his fate in the eyes of America and its allies. To Washington, in the middle of the Cold War, a Congo drifting toward Moscow was unthinkable. In the shadows, plots thickened. President Joseph Kasavubu, once Lumumba's ally, now turned against him. The army's commander, Joseph Mobutu, young, ambitious, and clever, saw his chance. Backed with foreign cash, Mobutu staged a coup, placed Lumumba under house arrest, and presented himself to the West as a safer bet. But Lumumba was not a man who would sit quietly while his country was stolen. He escaped house arrest and tried to rally his supporters. For weeks, he moved under the cover of night, slipping through forests and villages, sending out radio messages calling the people to stand up for their freedom. But the net was closing. Mobutu's soldiers tracked him down. In December 1960, Lumumba was captured as he tried to reach Stanleyville, where loyalists waited. Beaten and bound, he was handed over to his enemies in Katanga, the very secessionists he had fought to keep in Congo. On January 17, 1961, in a lonely clearing, Patrice Lumumba was executed by a firing squad. Belgian officers stood by, watching. His body was dismembered and dissolved in acid to hide the evidence. But you cannot dissolve an idea so easily. His murder shocked the world. Protests broke out from Accra to Moscow. In African capitals, students and workers vowed never to forget the young man who dared to speak of true freedom. His words, spoken on that Independence Day, became rallying cries for generations of revolutionaries. Joseph Mobutu, later Mobutu Sese Seko, would rule Congo, renamed Zaire, for over 30 years with Western backing. Katanga's minerals kept flowing into Western industries. The Cold War chessboard remained balanced, but at a cost that Congo still pays today. Today, Patrice Lumumba's image appears on murals, in songs, in the chants of protesters demanding a new Africa, one free of foreign hands in its pockets, one where leaders serve the people, not distant capitals. His tooth, the only piece of him ever recovered, was finally returned to his family by Belgium in 2022. A small gesture decades too late. But for many Congolese, it is not the tooth that matters. It is the fire that Lumumba lit. He died young, just 35, but his dream did not. He once said, "The day will come when history will speak. But it will not be the history which will be taught in Brussels, Paris, or Washington. Africa will write its own history, and it will be a history of glory and dignity." Today, millions still hope to finish that chapter. Patrice Lumumba's voice was silenced, but his dream for Africa still demands to be heard. Subscribe to Dark Africa Files, where we keep the stories alive that others tried to erase.